playing in our growing democracy. But tonight we're not talking about that. We're talking about business and its role in society. A lot of focus has been put on the public sector corruption, but tonight we want to focus on private sector corruption. There's been lots and lots of things happening. Last year was a particularly bad year for the business sector, with audit firms, for example, being found to be on the wrong side of the law. We have seen disastrous corporate misfirings like that of Steenhoff. And somebody who's been at the center of looking at things like uncompetitive conduct of business, almost like a knight in shining armor there, given such little focus that's set on such issues, is the Competition Commissioner, Tembinkosi Bonakele, who is my guest tonight. Let's not waste any time and go now and talk frankly to him. Thank you so much for making time. I understand you've just landed from one of your international missions. How has it been over the last decade or so, right, focusing on issues of private sector corruption? Essentially what it is. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, we give it a nice name like collusion and cartels, but basically it's exactly what is happening where in the case of Steenhoff, for example, pension funds are being looted really in broad daylight, where in the case of cartels like those that would even take advantage of something as basic as bread. Give me a sense generally of what you think of the state of private sector corruption in South Africa.
You know, JJ, there was a time when nobody believed that we could find collusion in South Africa to the extent that we did. But around about 2006, 2007, when we discovered the bread cartel, after that, I think there was an awakening in society, because we started to hear from many whistleblowers, and we ourselves were surprised by the extent of these problems in the economy. Basic food products in South Africa have been affected. I mean, we're doing investigations in things like flour for baking bread, maize meal. We've done cases there. These are proven cases that have been settled or prosecuted before the tribunal. Fats and oils. We have done infrastructure. There was this famous construction cartel. So whether you look at basic infrastructure needed for building houses, building our roads, bridges, railway lines, we have found massive instances of collusion. So it's worrisome in its extent and breadth.
So, I mean, the Competition Commission, obviously with a clear mandate to look at anti-competitive behavior, but there isn't a similar institution that you can compare to the public protector. A public protector really look at maladministration in the public sector and in the process, obviously, uncovering a lot of corruption. Leaving the Competition Commission to almost now be seen to be the only institution that seems to be probing how private sector, right, conducts its business in a sense, in a moral sense, in a sense that is that would avoid corruption. Do you think there is a need to either extend the scope of the Competition Commission to be able to not just look at things that have to do with competition, but could look at corruption broadly? Or do you think there are enough institutions to be able to do that?
I think there are enough institutions. Perhaps the Commission has been very active and in the public domain. But we look specifically on transgressions emanating from the Competition Statute, the Competition Act. But there are things such as corruption, and you've mentioned some of the corruption at a grain scale that we've seen more recently. So institutions like the Hawks have a mandate to look at the private sector, and auditing firms have a huge role in uncovering what's happening in the private sector, just like you have the Auditor General in the public sector. So institutions are there. It's a matter of how they function as well as coordination between these institutions. And I think that's very, very important, because we've recently now had the criminalization of cartels. Now, for that to work, the Commission doesn't have powers in terms of the Constitution to prosecute cartels. You're going to need the NPA to come on board, and you're going to need specialist investigators.
So you can only gather the information, and then there will be somebody else who must make the decision about whether or not to prosecute, which means that so far it has sort of introduced the level of complacency, because they know you're going to come to them, you're going to find them guilty, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to give them a fine, and frankly, that will be the end of the story.
Well, the fines have been increasing. We've recently fined the firm 1.5 billion. Of course, theoretically, that should deter firms from engaging in this conduct. So for as long as we are seeing that there are people who engage in this type of thing, it means that deterrence is not yet sufficient. Yeah. So
why do you think deterrence is not sufficient given your fines? Is it because the fines are set? In a sense, they've got an upper limit of what you can impose as a fine. That would then mean that the business could potentially budget for it and continue with their conduct.
I'm not sure if it only ends with fines. You know, there's terrible reputation that comes with being found to have colluded. I mean, CEOs have lost jobs out of as a result of our investigations. So I think that firms know the problem, but the weakness in the competition statutes, and it's not only a South African problem, is that the legislation targets firms and not individuals. So only recently are we seeing statutes that are being promulgated in different countries, including South Africa, that are seeking to target individuals. But these statutes are new and are complex in the sense that they entail interagency cooperation. So I think that there is a lot of work that we are going to have to do to show that not only the firms will be held liable for these transgressions, but the individuals themselves will also be held liable. And
is that not in an amended Competition Act that has apparently been sitting on the government's desk for some 10 years?
This act did take some time because there were challenges around the constitutionality of the criminal provisions. And now has been finally promulgated and came into effect. But still, you need institutional readiness for that. And in fact, we have said to government as well that we still think that there are refinements that need to be done to the legislation in order to make it effective. But it doesn't mean that we are sitting and doing nothing. So I've been engaging with both the police leadership as well as the NPA leadership about how we can make sure that we prosecute those who have been found to have been guilty of. How
are you dealing with the criticism that your fines, given sometimes the multi-billion nature of the companies you are dealing with, are really not enough? They are like a slap in the wrist for these companies. And I'm linking with what we earlier on discussed about deterrence not coming through really from such punishment, so to speak.
Right now, the fines are kept at 10% of the turnover of the firm that has been found guilty. And I really don't know how far you can go in fining people. There is an issue of culture as well that we must deal with. Because when you have a sort of kind of an old boys club that's running industry, you are going to have these sort of things. If you have a culture infested with say, drug problems, is an easy solution to think that you're just simply going to lock people up. There's something more that's required. It's the same with business. I think we've got to think more about how you change the culture, and we've raised these things. These include ensuring that our business environment is diverse. I've never seen a cartel that's multiracial, for example. I've never seen a cartel that has women involved. I think there was only one woman in a particular cartel I would not mention now. But diversity is clear, aids compliance. Because there's a certain discipline that people have when they are not too familiar with each other. So if people play golf together, they go to church together. We've had cartels where people pray before they engage in unlawful discussions. So that just shows you that we have a very small pool where we draw business leadership, whether it's CEOs, it's directors. They will often
they end
know
up
each
being
other.
too familiar.
That's
and
right.
in fact, when they engage in this collusion, they don't think there's anything wrong. They see it as just part of a culture of doing business.
That's right. I mean, South Africa has got one of the most concentrated sectors, and there's a lot of interlocking directorship. So people with directorship in different companies, sometimes that are supplying each other, sometimes that are competing with one another. So that's part of our history, because the pool traditionally has been very small.
All right, after the break, I want us to talk about how all of this basically affects economic growth in South Africa. We're talking to the Competition Commissioner, Tembinkosi Bonakele, here on Frankly Speaking tonight. We're not live tonight, but you can follow us on hashtag Frankly Speaking. You can tweet us at JJ Tabane and also tweet us at SABC News Online. Let's take a break.